Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the Children and Young People's Scrutiny panel. We'll start with item 1, membership of the committee. My name is Cathal Burke and I chair the Children and Young People's Scrutiny panel. And if I can ask members of the panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to officers.
Councillor Shea Culler, Green Edward.
Darren O'Donovan, I'm a Dewsbury West councillor.
Councillor Lisa Holmes, Shadow Cabinet Member for Children's Services.
Dale O'Neill, born to Cope T.
Hi, Greg Soul, Head of Educational Outcomes.
Steve Combe, Head of Corporate Parenting.
Joanne Sanders, Service Director for Learning and Early Support.
Good morning, I'm Elaine McShane, Service Director for Family Support and Child Protection.
Good morning, I'm Michelle Wheatcroft, Head of Service for Early Support.
I'm Viv Kendrick, I'm here observing and portfolio holder for Children and Young People's Services.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Item 2 is minutes of the previous meeting. Can panel members approve the minutes of the previous meeting? If they're an accurate account of the meeting that took place on the 25th of February.
I'll propose the minutes.
Thank you. Item 3 is interest. If councillors have any interest they wish to declare, if they can fill out the appropriate paperwork and hand it in at the end of the meeting. Item 4 is admission of the public. All of the items on the agenda are to take place in public. There's no private items on this agenda. Item 5 is number of children in care. This is for the panel to consider the latest data showing the number of children in care in Kirklees. Steve, I think you want to take this report.
Yeah, to provide information, which we're doing on a regular basis now, relating to the number and profile of children in our care, including information related to the number placed outside of the district. If you go on to the summary, which is on page 12, you can see there in terms of per 10,000 child population, how we perform against statistical neighbours and also against the England average. And once again, we've got the list of DFE statistical neighbours, which Scrutiny asked for on a previous occasion. So at the moment, we 63 per 10,000 statistical neighbours. Based on the 2018 figures, were 86 per 10,000, and England was 64 per 10,000. If you go on to the graph, which is on the top of page 13, you can see there the number of children in care between December and January went up to 633, so it increased by 4. I can update Scrutiny that the figure is sort of hovering generally around the 630 figure, and last week we were around 629. So the figure generally is around that high 620 or around 630 at the moment. On low down on page 13, we show the breakdown by age and gender of children in care. And you can see the largest group is boys aged 11 to 15, and the largest group for girls is 11 to 15, that's 99 children there. Overleaf on page 14, we've got the information regarding children placed outside of, more than 20 miles outside of district up to 28th of February. You see there's a slight decline down to 104 children, and that's something we continue to monitor. And when there's requests for placements out of district, that's something we look at in great detail, and we have an ongoing piece of work analysing the children and young people who are placed outside of district, and when opportunity arises to place within district, we do get occasions where we move some of those young people back if it's safe to do so and in their best interests. At the bottom of page 14, you can see the ethnicity profile of our children in care. So that's the standard snapshot of our children in care.
Thank you, Steve. Just on the last one of children placed more than 20 miles outside of Kirklees. Now, I understand there is work taking place and it's being monitored and everything else. With regards to those where it is safe to do so and in their best interests, how many would you see we could reduce that number by further? And what would be an ideal number where you would say, based on the numbers and who we know and the individuals involved, where we could reduce that down so that we can save money and also do the best that we can for the young people in our care?
Yeah, as we've stated previously at Scrutiny, it's an ongoing piece of work on a case-by-case basis. Some of those young people, as they attain the age of 18, will fall away from those figures and go into other types of placements. We have a group of young people in terms of external residential placements. We've done a piece of work around the getting more of our young people in fostering family type settings. So if you went back to the end of 2017, we had 53 young people in external residential placements. We're now around 35, 36. So it's an ongoing piece of work, looking at those young people and when the opportunity arises. And what we have to be mindful of these young people will be in education settings, etc. So it's considering everything in the round and what's in the best interest of young people. Because of the various work we're doing, such as Legal Gateway and Permanence Panel, we do hope as we move forward that number will reduce further. We have some young people who are in short-term fostering placements outside of the district, and we are looking for long-term foster carers, and we're actually speaking to our own foster carers, but also we are going to have a meeting with the independent agencies, which will be a profiling day to look at some of those young people that we're looking for long-term families for, to say to the agency, this is a profile of the child, we're looking for a long-term family, foster family within the Kirklees district for this child. Do you have any carers within your pool of carers who may be interested? So that's going to be in the form of sort of an open morning where the agencies will come along. So we've got various strands of work going on. It's difficult to give a specific number because it just depends what opportunities come up. So with that event, it may be some of the agencies put people forward to say, yeah, we do have carers within the Kirklees district who are looking to provide long-term care, would be a good match for that particular young person. So it's an ongoing piece of work with lots of different strands to it. But the primary thing is to consider the needs of those children and young people on an individual basis.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just ask about that table as well? So I guess knowing how important it is that children placed outside of areas still get the package of care and support that they need from services, do the children placed out of area have a social worker in Kirklees and a social worker in the other district? And what sort of conversations go on between ourselves and services in other districts around making sure the package of care for that young person is appropriate?
When we place a child outside of district, the first thing we do is inform the local authority where we're making the placement, that this placement's going to be made. The virtual school are involved, so colleagues in our virtual school will speak with the virtual school in the area where the child's going to be placed. In terms of our designated nurse for children in care, depending on how far the distance is, because some of these can be within distance for the health assessments extra to be carried out by our own nurses. If they're further afield, then in terms of that health wraparound, they would be having conversations with health services within that area. In terms of the social work support, the allocated worker for the child remains the same, so the visits that take place would be the same frequency as if the child was placed within Kirklees district. So there's lots of communication required to make sure when we do monitor things like the health data, the education data in detail on a regular basis, particularly a corporate parenting board where we produce this information and also go into more depth as well about what's going on for that particular cohort of children and young people.
So how many children have we got who are placed outside Kirklees simply because we don't have a place for them here because of a shortage of suitable foster carers? And have there been any issues that we as the scrutiny panel should be aware of that have been identified by these social work visits or whatever else that are an issue because of location in particular, but not just that? So as a scrutiny panel, we need to know that those children are okay where they are and there's no other factors that we need to consider. So I just want to know what issues may have come up, if any.
All children in care have regular childcare reviews, so they've got an independent reviewing officer. So every 6 months there's reviews taking place for those children. So everything gets looked at by that independent reviewing officer in the round for what's happening for that child. In terms of can specific issues arise when children are placed outside of Kirklees, I think the biggest issue that can arise is that one around making sure we keep on with communication, that the virtual school are speaking to the schools, etc., that our health colleagues are speaking with health in that area. I wouldn't say that we get any more issues with our children in care cohort, like additional issues outside of district. Things like contact can be more difficult because that can take more time to do and more effort's got to be put into making that contact. So for instance, if a child's in care in Kirklees and you're organising family contact, that's an easier thing to do. We still have to organise the contact when the child's placed outside of Kirklees, but more thought's got to go into that to make sure it's not being disruptive. I think there's another question you asked as well. How many?
It was more about how many are outside Kirklees because we don't have a place. It's simply an issue that we haven't got enough foster carers.
Yeah, I think to answer that question regarding that specific cohort, we'd have to do a case-by-case analysis about the reasons for the placement initially. So, for example, occasionally to keep siblings together. If you're looking for a placement for 2 or 3 siblings, the primary issue can be to try and keep them together. So, I mean, we can go through the list of those 104 children, but it just depends at that moment in time who is available, the age profile of our existing carers. Would we have less children placed outside of district if we had more local foster carers within district? We certainly would, because if we had more choice, more carers with bigger property willing to take sibling groups, etc. Regarding those 104 children, we'd have to go through case by case to see initially what the reason was. I mean, there will be some for safeguarding reasons, etc. But we'd need to do a case-by-case analysis, but in a broad answer to your question would be, if we had more local foster carers, would we be able to reduce that number? The answer would be yes. If we had more foster carers and choice within district, then yes, we would be able to reduce that number.
Take Elaine next, please.
I just wanted to add to what Steve was saying. The reason for us having the event is about not necessarily just having available foster carers, it's the right foster carers that can provide a long-term commitment to these young people. So we might have placements available, but they're not the most suitable. So we're having the event to make sure that actually we can recruit specific carers for specific children. The other approach that we want to take as well is an approach where if children are placed long term, that foster carers will consider special guardianship orders in the longer term, because that gives a more stronger sense of permanence for the children. And we're going to explore what a support package would look like for the carers, for them to be able to do that.
I'm taking a particular interest in this today because I want to know, something occurred to me after the last meeting. There are going to be extra challenges, if you've just started speaking of, in having children in other authorities. So we're having to deal with a lot more health providers, schools, ones that we may not, as an authority, be particularly, already have good links with, and that in itself is a big challenge, I'm guessing. So I was trying to sort of dig down a little bit on what this is actually meaning to us. With regard resources, and I understand about the guardianship because we spoke about that as well. So I'm just trying to understand, as a member of Scrutiny, what is sitting at the side of having children living in other authorities, what other pieces of work we might need to do as a Scrutiny panel to look at the challenges that are added to having a looked after child in the first place, which is a big, sort of resource. It needs a lot of resource in itself, but when they're in another authority and we're having to send social workers over there and we're dealing with lots of different schools, health providers, other agencies that we're not familiar with. I mean, we're talking about a lot of different authorities we've got our children living in now. What kind of numbers and what are our relationships with them?
Yeah, I previously provided to Scrutiny a map with the details of, and we could do that again with the details on a map of where, specific children are placed. Yeah. I mean, we have a duty to form those relationships, to monitor. I mean, I would say again, we would prefer to have some of those children within district, but like Elaine said, it's got to be with the right carer, the right placement, the right time. Does it provide the need to do additional work? Yes, it does. But if the example I give there was a sibling group, if it means keeping a sibling group together, that we have to go slightly outside of district, then that would be our primary thing. But we could, the map we provided previously, we could provide that, which would give details, the real detail around where they are. I would like to guess how many different authorities. There are a number of different authorities. If I remember the last time we done the map, dotted around the country, and some of them which look have been placed at significant distance. Some of those were kinship carers, so it's where a child comes into our care, but grandmother lives, as an example, on the south coast, and we place as a connected person, and that person becomes a foster carer, so they're out of district. And like Elaine said, the key in those cases is trying to translate that into something like a special guardianship, because if you get the special guardianship, then it's that sense of permanence, and also the support is a different sort of support.
I think I would like us as a Scrutiny panel to do a piece of work on children that are being cared for outside of Kirklees, and to maybe look at some case history of outcomes as well, given the challenges that have just been described, and also the fact that there are other issues I think we need to look at, particularly on the outcome side, and whether those children came back and then what happened.
Yeah, we can do that. piece of work and look at some of the specific cases. I mean, some of our young people placed outside the district have very good outcomes. And yeah, I mean, that's fine. We can have a look at a specific piece of work.
Just to reassure members, so last week I took the opportunity, because I keep a monitoring of the progress of these young people. So I think I looked at about 30 cases last week to look at the planning, to look at what experience of the young person was, just to satisfy myself that actually their needs are being met. And I think you're right to, you know, this is a national picture in terms of the number of children and young people that are entering into care. I think, interestingly for Kirklees, we've not gone in exactly the same way as other local authorities, because a majority of other local authorities have seen an increase in looked after children, so there are, you know, many challenges around that in terms of placement, availability and suitability. But I think it probably is a good opportunity to take this piece of work and look at some projections of what the future looks like for our looked after population, and do some projections of what other placements we might want to consider.
Yeah, sorry, and I think I agree with that, and I think that work probably already goes on, because I'm mindful of the budget in February where investment was made in extra care places for young people, wasn't it? So I take confidence in the fact that I think some of that work, and you're nodding that summer work does happen, and forecasting happens as well, doesn't it? And I totally understand the fact that it's all about the fit, isn't it? And I would assume that we've got foster carers in Kirklees who are looking after children from outside of Kirklees, and it's all about the fit ultimately, isn't it? So I take confidence from what you've said.
I would agree that I think as a panel, Councillor Holmes' suggestion about doing a bit more work with this, because I think it's been good this year to receive this information on a regular basis where we had not always done so. And I think looking at the numbers and looking at that 104, just for the panel to see how many of those, if it's easier to do it that way, to see how many of those are placed outside of Kirklees because there's a need and there's a specific reason for that. And then you get the number who are placed outside for no other reason because we can't accommodate them. I'd also like to look at the financial implications of that and how that affects us, and when it comes to budgeting, and to ensure that we are meeting the needs of our young people and any complications or any extra issues that may occur as a result of being placed outside of the area. Obviously it is complicated and complex, and each one is completely different and there's reasons. But I think it would be useful for the panel, and I would agree with looking a bit deeper into this issue. Okay. Any other questions or comments from panel members? No? Okay, thank you, Steve. So item 6 is the Kirklees Learning Strategy. This is for the panel to consider a report providing an outline of key areas of the Kirklees Learning Strategy, which is born out of the latest Educational Outcomes Report. Harpreet, you're going to present. Thank you.
Good morning. The key thing for this session really is to get some feedback from you, because we've outlined 5 areas based on the data analysis that could well form the strategy. Excuse me. And I want to stress that they're overarching areas, because each one of them will have different aspects to them. If I go through why we've chosen those 5, that might be useful. So we're certainly feeling in terms of phonics, language and communication, that's the breadth of the learners across Kirklees. At some point we'll come across a need to really drive that. At the moment we're in discussions with various partners about which area to focus on, but it's looking very much like early years, and phonics is going to be something we're really going to drive this strategy with. Similarly with numeracy as well, we don't want to make the mistake of trying to encompass everything across all the key stages, and our data analysis tells us a little bit more whether it's key stage 1 or 2 or 4. So that's another aspect that when we've also met with various professionals in the sector who can tell us more about the lay of the land in terms of mathematics in Kirklees, we can look very carefully at that particular part of the strategy. Both of them need a joined up strategy that works with various people, particularly PVI, earlier settings, schools, social care, and it's something that we're very keen that we make this a measured approach over time and not rush to suddenly look at phonics, language and numeracy and look for quick fixes over the next year so that our data will improve, because arguably that's not going to be sustainable. And the reason why we've found that to be our conclusion is the research is telling us very much that that's the strategy we need to take. The third part of the ideas we're looking at strategy is a key national initiative around the profile and improvement of our disadvantaged learners, whoever they may be across Kirklees. And some of the data that we've looked at shows that some of those young people are often a year or not further behind their peers. So some of the two areas I've already mentioned in terms of phonics and numeracy are real key strategies to help those young people immerse themselves in language, they have a more developed understanding of numeracy with their families and with other providers so that they can make those gains and access some of those opportunities that their peers will have at the end of the age of 16. A key area that we feel, and it's in the news very much now nationally, is the whole concept of attending better and also reducing exclusions, and I think the two of them are combined. In that area, we've already started some work with the secondary heads with a session 2 weeks ago with a commitment to working collaboratively to look at areas and how we can do that piece of work. And it'd be very useful to come back to Scrutiny at some point just to sort of give you an update on how that's going. But its early indications are very, very positive from secondary head teachers. Within there as well is other information that we are going to pool. So we've just had the peer review for SEND, and there's some key objectives really coming out of that. We want to make sure we encompass within that strategy to reduce exclusions. That will form part of the work in the Highlands review. There comes some workforce development initiatives that we want to make sure that we're working across. We found also we're working across Yorkshire and Humber local authorities with colleagues in similar roles. Everybody is working around this agenda, so we've also started an initiative of working with all those partners to again pool best practice. And I think a major feature of that work is to make sure it is with the rest of our partners in terms of inclusion in special school. In fact, at the secondary head teachers meeting, it was a head teacher from one of our special schools who ran a session to open up that whole discussion of teaching, learning and behaviour to reduce exclusions. So we feel that's a real key piece of work. We want to continue working with the police, with CAMS, youth offending teams, so that we genuinely have over time a joined up strategy for Kirklees to reduce exclusions. Underpinning all of these four is a commitment to improving the quality of leadership and management, whatever that might be, including governance. And some of those strategies are to do with improved recruitment and retention in our school system, and also using best practice nationally to improve the quality of that leadership where that's needed across the whole system. And also making sure that our governance is fit for purpose. So there has been good feedback from a governor's briefing, and where governors were talking about different ways we may well engage them in terms of their training as well. And we're very keen to develop a young people's voice strategy, so that at the heart of the work we're doing over the next few years, that our young people in Kirklees have a key say in feeding back to us, but also shaping some of those strategies that will, in the end, benefit them.
Questions or comments from panel members? Dale?
If I can take you back to page 18, the penultimate bullet point. A close analysis of recent Ofsted reports highlights the inconsistent performance of school leaders in governance. Evidenced by what, please?
Each time there's an inspection, we use a system called Nexus so we can pull together information. And close analysis, often Ofsted reports will highlight there is a need to improve these areas. So it's a simple job of looking at Ofsted reports and pulling out where there's a real key need for governance or leadership to improve. And as an inspector myself, I brought that expertise to the team to see, well, where is it we can see there may be some consistencies around the type of governance we need to train.
Could you just give me an example of what an inconsistency is?
So you may have a governing body who, in an inspection, have used the pupil premium money effectively. And so inspectors have said this is a pool of money directed at a particular cohort of young people, and they've been holding the school to account. So all inspectors often look at governors' minutes, speak to governors and get a sense of that's a robust policy. The inconsistency often happens across schools where that's a glaring omission. So they could go through an inspection and inspector found there hasn't been the rigour of holding the school to account and using that money. So that's the sort of inconsistencies we may well pick up.
I have a few things I'd like to discuss. A couple of things that you just pointed out there. Staff turnover. Is our staff turnover in Kirklees schools what we would hope and expect compared to our statistical neighbours or whatever else you use as a benchmarking? And do we have many governor vacancies as well? Being a school governor is very challenging. It's done on an FOC basis. And I know I've been a governor and it is really, really tough work. So I just wondered how we were with vacancies and retaining governors and staff in schools. Do you want to do that first? Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you for those. That's a key part of the sort of feedback I'm keen from Scrutiny, because the first issue about turnover, we're just going to commission a piece of work around recruitment retention. And one of the first things we decided is we don't know the full picture currently of where are the patterns in terms of recruitment retention. We have national trends that often schools do replicate, but a further analysis will reveal whereabouts in Kirklees or which particular settings where there are issues. So that's something we can come back to in terms of having that data. And secondly, similarly with governance, that's a bit of work we will now do in terms of finding out where are there key vacancies, is it in primary, secondary, in infant schools, just to inform us so that we actually target the type of work we need to do with governors where they're needed.
Okay, and I believe I mentioned this in the last meeting of Scrutiny. We keep talking about exclusions. I think isolations are equally important as a focus, because that's children out of the classroom, they're out of their group, and you can give them work, but they are not being taught as they should be in a classroom. So I don't personally, I don't want to see any more reports that only talk about exclusions, because I think isolations are just as important to consider.
I mean, every exclusion is reported to the DFE, so we have data across Kirklees that we can actually identify and analyse further. In terms of isolation, that tends to be individual schools' behaviour policies, and often they're interpreted in very different ways, even at the point where parents or anybody might be challenging that. But certainly, I think you should take heart from the feedback you have about the secondary heads, the initiative to move forward and become more inclusive, and be more an inclusive school system. At the heart, there is a working group looking at exactly that, the quality of education we receive. And I think we have something on our side, because certainly the new Ofsted framework is asking schools to actually, to what extent are you inclusive and looking after the needs of all children, particularly in terms of mental health awareness. So I think that is always a very strong lever for schools to be proactive and reflecting, but we shall certainly put that in. The difficulty is for anybody to pull out how many isolations there have been in schools across Kirklees, because schools are not actually obliged to share that. That would be a partnership piece of work that we'd have to do, but it's certainly part of the agenda that we're discussing.
I am now regularly contacted by parents whose children are repeatedly put into isolation. I don't go into the detail of that because my response is always that you should go and speak to the school. If you have been through the normal process, you should then approach the governing body. That's not for me to address unless they've exhausted all the normal routes, as you can understand. But I would welcome more information on how many hours of teaching children lose to isolation and why, and I think that's really, really important. And I wouldn't want us to ever just focus on the exclusion side, because I think isolations are probably a lot more school hours than the exclusions. And I'm sure there's good reason, and you know, when you've got a class of 30 children or whatever, you know, one child can't disrupt that. You've got to think of everybody. I understand there's a need for it, but we need to be aware if schools are routinely using that to make life a bit easier. If that's happening, I hope it isn't, but that needs addressing, and we as a scrutiny panel should be keeping that in our minds.
So can I get that back in? Thank you.
Just before I take you out, just a further comment on the notion of exclusions and isolation. I think it is a big concern, the number of isolations or internal inclusions or exclusions that take place within a school as a way of dealing with issues. And it is that children with special educational needs or disabilities are far more likely to be excluded from mainstream education than their classmates. So I think it would be good to know and understand that we have appropriate alternative provisions within the authority to deal with those who are not suited, because I think it's unfair and wrong to stigmatise some of these young people who don't fit into a mainstream education, and we're saying they're excluded, and then they can be called many things as problem children, or they're bad, or they don't fit in. And I think that's very disappointing, and it's the wrong way to treat a young person when they're growing up in those early stages. Just because they don't fit into what people would consider the norm, they're then excluded, and that's something that stays with them for the rest of their lives, not just their education. So I think we need to look at proactively looking at alternative provisions that can cope and deal with different people at different levels, different backgrounds, different needs and abilities.
Thank you. Page 20, improve leadership and management. The final bullet point, develop a strong young people's voice and strategy. How?
One of the things I've seen in other authorities is that they've used existing structures, so maybe youth parliament or maybe school councils across a local authority to pull the idea of young people. So there are discussions at the moment about what would be the most appropriate for here. I know I've spoken to another officer within our local authority where there's some work about young people, engaging them in terms of democracy coming to an end. There's a report coming to an end. That will really help us inform what the situation is at the moment. But there are some initiatives out there that I think we can actually tap into rather than starting from scratch and reinventing it. So some local authorities have had pop-up sessions for young people. They've used colleges as a starting point. And that's the first place I went to, was Kirklees College, to talk about the young people who've been through the system. And they're very keen to help us use that as a blueprint. But at the moment, again, it would be a mistake to rush into a strategy when at the moment we don't know what is happening fully until this report is brought out and we can find out from schools what their best practice. What I wouldn't want is just the voice of some types of children. There may well be, and I've been in school for 30 years, you might get a certain type of child in a school council, but to what extent do they represent the population at large? So we want to tap into some of those vulnerable learners, those young people who've been excluded, and what was their pathway, and also those people who've had a difficult time, but they've done really well, those real success stories, to try and inform the strategy.
Joanne?
Thank you. I just wanted to say, obviously, the purpose of bringing the sort of outline areas for this strategy is to get some engagement. We haven't done all the how yet. The really important thing is that we get this is not all within a local authority's gift, it's how we work with partners, including yourselves. So I think we want to be able to baseline and coordinate. There's some amazing stuff going on across this LA, but it's in pockets, and where there's great practice, we want to be able to share that and celebrate it where things aren't working as well. So, for example, you know, if you're getting parental concerns, counsellor homes about youngsters that are not receiving their entitlement, then we need to understand that a little bit better. But at this moment in time, this is not going to be something that happens overnight, but it's informed by the data that we presented last time. If we've got the broad areas right, then it's what work plans sit underneath that, and how does it coordinate with work around the high needs review and sufficiency. So it's really good that those connections are being made, so thank you for that.
I'm going to boast now. Just an example of some good practice. So back in 2012, we actually used some of our ward budget in the district committee, area committee 2012, I don't think it changed yet. And we ran a small study club on a Saturday morning in a TRA with a teacher and me as an assistant, in a nice relaxed environment for a particular group from a local primary school, and it worked really well. We did the same in 2013 and 2014, and then 2015 right up till now. We've managed to do it on a Dewsbury-wide basis with the third sector, delivering very bespoke, relaxed atmosphere study clubs for particular groups of children at all our Dewsbury primary schools, and it works really well. And it's something that I guess historically district committees, area committees and ward budgets haven't really got involved with, but I think increasingly we've needed to, and it's worked really well. I just think it's maybe a little bit of food for thought. What I was going to ask is, I was talking to one of the public health officers recently about the emotional health and wellbeing leads that are now emerging within schools, and I wonder whether I've got the right people in front of me that might be able to tell me a little bit about that. Possibly not, because it sounds really valuable. When I read the email, it sounds like what we're doing is working with North Paul and educational links to provide a better health and well-being offer or network for young people, which invariably will help with some of the things that we're looking at here.
I think in light of what John just said about how we're building that strategy, certainly the high needs review and the SEN peer review we've had is going to really inform us, working with the partners such as CAMS and other organisations, what can we do effectively as a local authority to deal with some key pressing thing. And then there is also about skilling up our workforce, and often that's a really key point that we can do to spread that good practice with those people who are nearest in contact with young people is really important too.
Sorry, Dale, just before you come in, Joanne wants to respond.
I think you're right, absolutely. I think it's not just as part of the learning strategy, it's also about the work that we're undertaking with family support, our early support part of the world. We as a local authority as well have been fortunate enough to be part of a Trailblazer project for mental health in schools. So we've got working with two of the community hub areas, and that's about doing things in a different way. So I think there are huge opportunities. The skill is that it's not just in the learning strategy and it's not just in the early support, that we join that up across professionals. So yes, is the answer.
Yeah, sorry, can I just quickly finish on that? I didn't expect you to go in, but yeah, so I'd also scribbled down about community coordinators and the Community Plus offer. So yeah, I think my hope is that they are going into schools and doing some of that joined up work with those families and those young people to make sure that they're getting the right kind of support.
Go back to phonics, communication and reading, bullet point 5. Can I ask you, what are the authority-led reading strategies and how and why were they selected?
They were, they were focused on Key Stage 1 and 2 reading over the last 18 months, where previous analysis had shown that there were some needs in those groups. It's accelerated reading, and there are several groups involved, and at Schools Forum, that's where they're feeding back and reporting back on how that initiative has gone. So we're now waiting the next stage of their feedback next term. That will help us see whether there is some success in there that we build upon, because the last thing we want to do is to start a new strategy where there's something in place. So evaluating the success of that would be really useful for other schools to think, well, that's something we can really support and do.
Sorry, can I just go one more turn? It's hard not to get embroiled in this. You know, like others, I've got 2 young children at primary school, and I just want to give an example of the sort of support that we receive that I hope is the mentality of, you know, all our, particularly primary school head teachers, is that when my 4-year-old started school in September, he didn't take to it well, and there were days he didn't want to go, and the head teacher was fine with that. Said she was very responsible with the advice, but she said, you know, if you really up against it one morning, then he doesn't have to come. Just we'll work on it, it will get better. And I thought that responsible outlook from that head teacher was really useful. And I can't say it works in every example, but it certainly worked in our example, because now he's doing fine. And yes, we did keep him off school a couple of times when it wasn't going well one morning for him, but I'm glad we did, and I'm glad the head teacher was moderate and responsible enough and confident enough to give us that advice to say, look, don't worry, you don't worry, because as a school we're not worried, just it will come with time. And I think that's the ethos that I hope is through all our head teachers.
I think we're really fortunate. We've got excellent, and I'm not talking about Ofsted judgments, I'm talking about the sort of care and attention with which our leaders lead schools. It's very child focused, very family focused. I'm not saying everything's perfect, because we're all human beings working with human beings, but just in terms of getting youngsters ready to learn and feel confident, that is an area, and I think that did come out of the outcomes report if you want to measure it, actually that confidence. I remember Emma Brayford saying that's where youngsters were doing well, and I think our leaders do that well. I think one of the things that you've hit the nail on the head, though, Councillor O'Donovan, is absolutely that home to school relationship, because parents are absolutely the first educators of their youngsters, and that's what will make a huge difference. So those really good relationships between school, the child and the family is crucial in terms of the youngsters being able to achieve and be happy and well, and those are all the conditions where they can thrive and succeed. So that's definitely needs to figure as part of this strategy. It can make a huge difference.
Okay, any other questions or comments from panel members? No? I think obviously this is a very important strategy and to get right. Can you just outline then going forward the key steps going forward, timelines and next steps, and where Scrutiny fit into that process?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we have actually been having quite a lot of conversations around this strategy. What does it look like? I think the intention is that we pull together a 5-year plan, and then we have some key focus year on year. There's been an awful lot of opportunity to talk with some of our school leaders as part of the Education and Learning Partnership Board. As part of that board, there's an improvement committee. Those colleagues have looked in detail about, how can we measure, how can we see impact, because like any strategy, it's about what we actually do. So what does pupil voice look like? What does the right strategies look like? And how can we evidence impact? I think where we'd like to get to is taking on board all the comments and feedback from the system. We'd like to be looking to finalise this in the summer term, and a full, if you like, launch, or it's there, it's in everybody's planning from September onwards. So I think what we'd like to do is, if at all possible, come back with a more worked up version later in June perhaps, for Scrutiny to have some final comments upon.
Do we have any schools that aren't engaging with us?
That's not been my experience. I think one of the things, we've been doing several things. Now that Harkereat's in role, it's obviously brought some additional capacity. We've just been undertaking a series of visits to as many schools as possible, and we're really fortunate. All our schools want to participate. Obviously, time is of the essence, and we have to find more creative ways of doing it. So we do have a partnership board, but we work really closely with our primary, secondary, and special school colleagues. And actually, the professional generosity has been quite astounding. So there's no lack of willingness. We just need to make it as easy as possible for people to feedback to us where things are going well and where they're not going so well, because we share the same thing. They're all our children. So,
when you talk about our schools, do you mean LEA schools, or does that include faith schools and academies?
I mean every school and setting in Kirklees, regardless of what flavour, whether they're academies or faith schools or voluntary aided schools. Actually, it's the quality of relationship, and we have exceptionally good ones in Kirklees.
Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the Early Support Partnership. So this is for the panel to consider an update on the development on the 3 programmes funded through the Department for Education Innovation Funding. Michelle, thank you.
Thank you. So the local authority early support service is implemented from April 2018, and I have had a service now been in post since July of 2018 too. Just a little bit of an overview. So the Early Support Service offers non-statutory services for children, young people and families, and that's in line with the Kirklees Early Support Strategy. And the entitlements includes family support, parenting and group work, family group conferencing, multi-systemic therapy and a new family mental health service. When I talk about the early support service, I'm very much talking about the offer that we have within the local authority, but I will talk about that wider early support partnership and as well. I think, as we all know, early support for children and families is more effective and less expensive than intervening when problems become more entrenched. Just going back to the 2016 Ofsted inspection, it highlighted that Kirklees needed to develop their educare services and ensure that timely support is available in a crisis. So many of the issues raised by Ofsted at the time were the problems that identified in Kirklees relating to the effectiveness of partnership working. And there's a strong commitment by partners, and a key aim of the 10-point improvement plan is to make best use of that and to improve outcomes for children and families. Success in changing children's services does rely on that strong and effective partnership working, and this has been very much a primary focus of the early support in Kirklees. Sal Tariq did a lot of work in terms of partnership engagement, and that, again, as I said, was around strengthening the early support partnership through a number of engagement events. The events included discussing and agreeing values and principles around early support, and that shared understanding that early support is not just a single council service, but it is that wider partnership, and it's everybody's responsibility. The engagement events discussed the importance of shared language. As there was part of us agreed the partnership preferred the use of the word support rather than help, and it was felt to be more positive and restorative, and then that was then reflected in the more recent strategy documents, and the approach is now referred to as early support. So the early support partnership, after a lot of work, was launched in January 2019, and we held an event which had a clear purpose to showcase the partnership and services right across the district and the work together in restorative, shared approach to deliver and respond to the early support needs of children, young people and families. With around 200 delegates at that event was quite overwhelming. And there was delegates from the local authority, Locala, Kirklees Safeguarding Board, schools, voluntary services, and they all came together, which I think demonstrated their commitment to the Kirklees vision, which is that all children should have the opportunity to reach their full potential and achieve their ambitions. At the event, we was able to launch the Kirklees Early Support Strategy. We also launched Safeguarding Board's framework for decision making and a new early support assessment. We developed all the documents with partners right across the partnership, rather than it just being council-led. So it outlines the approach to be taken, which is relationship-based, and emphasises the importance of conversations, and they're not doing two, but working together to achieve positive outcomes for children, young people and families in Kirklees. I think the approach outlined in the strategy is very much based on building around communities, developing resilience and developing networks, as developing sort of the place-based offering as well. It's recognised that some services work best across the authority as a whole, but we're developing a unifying but not uniformed offer that will reflect the needs and strengths of children, young people, families and the communities. So the Family Support Service, beginning of the Kirklees and Leeds partnership, was identified that there was issues with the existing EAT service, which is the Early Intervention Targeted Service, and a service review took place. That was worked with staff, and they listened to their concerns. There was the key worker role was reviewed, and listening to feedback there was named family support workers, as well as the service being named the Family Support Service, because it was feedback from staff that they wanted their sort of own identity, and it actually said what it does on the tin in terms of family support. Following the review, that brought stability to the service, and we was able to go out to recruitment for additional posts, and there was response to recruitment was really positive, and again we had a large number of applications received indicating that the service was, people actually wanted to work for the service in Kirklees, which was really positive. We then had some early support commission services as part of the early support offer, which were delivered by Action for Children and Humankind. Humankind was formerly known as DISC, and a decision was made by Cabinet to actually manage those services in-house and then to be delivered as one entity, which would allow for the consolidation of the early support services. The services delivered under contract were subject to pay, and actually today is the day that actually become part of the local authority, so we're just welcoming those staff into the service today. Action for Children were commissioned to deliver the Children's Centre core offer in the Dewsbury East and Dewsbury West areas, which included some universal and targeted services, and Humankind delivered more intense family support work, which was previously known as the Family Intervention Programme. So we recognise the importance of continuity of services with families, so working with them and consolidating the contracts, but they are to bring them in line with the agreed early support model going forward. Development of the new teams, which was funded by the Department for Education Innovation Funding, I think we've mentioned earlier, in terms of family group conferencing, MST, so that's multi-systemic therapy, and the Family Mental Health Service. So just a little bit, a quick overview there. Family group conferencing is a restorative approach, and it's a process that empowers families and their wider networks to draw on the strengths and resources that's within that family to make a safe plan for children. Previously, we did have a family group conferencing offer in Kirklees, but with the DFE funding, we've been able to expand that offer quite considerably. So now we have 10 family group coordinators and 2 team managers, and we've also already seen some good outcomes for those families where children have been able to stop with their families. So the next steps for the family group conferencing is that we need to work towards a stable workforce, which will allow for further development of the service and embedding that entitlement at the earliest opportunity to prevent children and families raising through the children's social care system. Moving on to MST. That's again, it's an intensive family and community-based intervention for children and young people, particularly around age 11 to 17. So there's a focus on secondary school children, and it's where young people are at risk of out-of-home placements, neither care or custody to their offending or having severe behaviour problems. Key goals of MST is to break the cycle of antisocial behaviours by keeping young people safe at home and in school and out of trouble. Again, MST launched in Kirklees in January after what followed a year of project planning involving colleagues from MST UK and from the Leeds Partnership. We're lucky to have now in a programme manager, and 4 full-time therapists have been recruited and trained and are now serving cases as from early February. We have been overwhelmed by the number of referrals we've received, and those have been received from quite a number of sources, including social care, youth offending, schools and health. So one of those key successes has been to establish a steering group for MST, which has involved multi-agency partner agencies, which again has been really positive. But the next steps for MST is in the first year to maintain the focus of the development of the staff and to provide targeted outcomes for families using the MST model, developing relationships with the wider stakeholders and ensuring long-term sustainability and funding. The last one, which is the Family Mental Health Service, again, that has been in Kirklees since around 2011, but the DFE funding again has allowed us to broaden the staff team. So just going back to some sort of previous points in terms of family mental health, the Family Mental Health team coordinate appropriate early supports for parents with mental health difficulties and share information relevant to welfare of the children. So they're very much bridging that gap between adults and children's mental health services. So where that there might be mental health of a parent impacting on family life. So one of the key successes for the team has been the case discussions with children's social workers, which has influenced their practice, and that again is upskilling our social workers who are working frontline with parents who have poor mental health. Again, the next steps of the mental health team are to continue to increase the links with key stakeholders and have a consolidated and sustainable team. So some of the next steps for sort of the wider early support service, we need to really embed the early support approach across the partnership and promote the concept of working with. We're very early on our journey and we recognise that. We want to ensure that it's a more joined up and well-defined local offer for families, which includes health. We've got the community hubs and the family support service that we need to develop. And I think one last thing, at the moment we've got a company in who's called People 2, which we've externally commissioned, who is just looking at the moment at that wider early support partnership. So the piece of work that they're doing, they're looking at identifying any gaps, any duplications, and through that analysis are looking for opportunities of what the future potentially integrated model of early support will look like across Kirklees. There's lots of information there.
Thank you for that. Just before I take in Councillor Donovan, can I just ask on the DFE funding and the impact on that and how that is sustainable long term?
Okay. The funding will come to an end now, so the 1st of April. So what we're looking at now, part of the the agreements for the grant was for us to sustain those teams going forward. So the funding will now be part of the wider early support base budget.
Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, there's a whole load of information there that's quite complicated, and I've been out and visited each of these teams to try and get my head around it, and I have to say I'm more than enthusiastic about the inroads that they're making. For us, it's about children not having to come into care if they don't have to. It's about children not getting into the youth justice system if they don't have to. And these interventions to me are invaluable, which is why as a council we will be supporting continuing these teams on. And I would recommend, perhaps not all of the scrutiny panel, but some representative scrutiny panel to perhaps go and visit these teams to really, really understand what they're doing and the impact they're making, because I think it's absolutely invaluable.
Thank you, that's very helpful, and I think that is something that the panel will consider, and especially when we look through the work programme for the next municipal year. Councillor Donovan.
Just a couple of questions. I'm just wondering why weren't we funding this last year? Why was the DFE offering the innovation grant last year for this?
As part of the partnership between Leeds and Kirklees, there were some key areas identified from an evidence base that had worked particularly well elsewhere, some in Leeds but some nationally as well. So as an opportunity and support to Kirklees, given that we're in that Ofsted category of inadequate, it was seen that the DFE would invest for the first 12 months with a view then to Kirklees taking that up. It's not unusual actually when local authorities are deemed inadequate where the unusual thing was a partnership with Leeds. On more than one occasion you would have a trust established that would have an additional investment of money. This was a small amount that would see Kirklees establish itself going forward.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? And I've been a bit of a tinker, really, obviously, because a year of this funding is just a drop in the ocean, isn't it? Yes, it's really valuable. Yes, I share Councillor Kendrick's thoughts on that as well. And, hopefully we can embed this into long-term plans for the council as well. But with such a vast amount of money on a service that has grown so much in so many new areas that are really valuable, I would hope that it was a drop in the ocean, really. It should have been 2 or 3 years funding to get this embedded and get this moving on so quick, because, after 1 year, the assumption that it can just transfer it over and that all these new therapists and all these new coordinators can just carry on life embedded after just a year is aspirational, and I would have just thought from a little bit more from government on this.
I think, like has been said, the most important thing is it's having impact. So if we are able to provide and keep these established services, if they're doing the right thing by youngsters, that means that if they don't have to come into care, which is incredibly expensive, then if there's dare I say it, if there is less money being spent on that part of the world, then the ability to reinvest in preventative and support services is absolutely the right thing to do. Yes, well, yeah.
The MST team, is that working with a specific age group of children or across the board?
It says the MST work with secondary age school children, so it's 11 to 17-year-olds and their families.
To my way of thinking, if you want to prevent children from coming into care in the first place, why aren't you working with the youngest age group, so that, because the older ones are almost in care. The younger ones, if you can get the younger ones and prevent them becoming into the older age group, to me it would seem to be more logical to have started with the younger children.
I think in terms of a model, it's a national, it's an international model, and so this is what is described as MSD standard and works with that age group. There are other models that actually work with different age groups, but because we have to decide on one area to start with, and what we can do going forward, as Joanne's described, if we can actually get to a position where we can reinvest, we will look at other models of MST that will work with the younger age group. There's MST CAN, which works with a younger age group, and that's probably something we could talk about at future scrutiny to describe the different models of MST and where this model fits.
I think my other point was that if you're working with the largest cohort, that seems to be the most problematical thing to do, because you've got 20 cases ready on the other. You're going to have a big waiting list all the time. You're only going to have a relatively small impact on a large cohort.
In terms of lanes, just said it's how the MST is being set up. So the model is that you can have one supervisor and 4 therapists, and they will build up to a larger workload. And I think as we review MST, that it may be that we need something else in Kirklees as well. So as part of the monitoring and working with MST UK, we will very much monitor this along the way. Just going back to your previous around sort of the age group as well, what the MST will do, they will work with the 11 to 17-year-olds, but they will also work with the rest of the families of these younger children in there, and they'll be working with them as well.
I do congratulate the Council on this particular programme, but I would like to encourage you to make it bespoke to ourselves rather than having to follow a specific, set of regulations or guidelines established by other people.
And actually, we wouldn't be able to do that. I understand exactly what you're saying, but actually in terms of the model working and being effective and demonstrating outcomes, it is that you have to work true to the model, and that's why it's taken the time to set up. And it is evidence-based. It has got good outcomes that are measured nationally, internationally, and we have to work with that framework. And I think that's why it's been a challenge to get it set up in the way that it has. But already, I think we're seeing some impact quite quickly, and we will, as Michelle said, monitor it and then look at what other types of resources we might want to sit alongside it.
This might sound a little flippant, but it's not meant to be. Why can't you eventually modify it and rename it?
Because it works with a licence, and so we have to have a licence to work with it, and actually what they're very clear about is, because this is monitored as far as from America, so the way that it comes down in terms of supervision and monitoring, and it is about to make sure it's as effective and remains effective, that you work within that model and that licence framework, including some quite detailed monitoring of outcomes for children and their families.
I just want to mention, I want to talk about the MST with regards to antisocial behaviour and young people starting to get into a little bit of bother. I'm sure all the councillors are the same, in that we often have members of the community contacting us. We'll encourage them to 101 to the police or go online. So the police presumably have a lot of information there. At the early levels of young people getting into a little bit of bother, and the pattern starts building up and then it gets more serious. I just wondered at what point we would be involved in that, because we used to have this great thing called an NMG, Neighbourhood Management Group. They seem to have fallen off the cliff a bit now, and we used to share information there. I just wondered where you, or where we as a council, at what point do we start accessing police intelligence on young people who are starting to go down that route? Do they have to have got into bother? Because the days when the local Bobby would have grabbed you by the scruff of your neck and dragged you home to your parents have gone now. Everything kind of is on system somewhere.
I think the key, and it's been a bit of a theme this morning, is about how well we join some of these things up and coordinate. So I think what Michelle's given an overview today around MST, the Family Support Service. There's obviously our colleagues in community safety, colleagues in social care, multi-agency, so health, police, third sector. The key is how do we get the forums working together. So MST is one thing. It's about how we utilise the others in coordination. In terms of, I'm not very familiar with the old neighbourhood management group, but absolutely the shared intelligence is something that we're working collectively on. How do we get to do things once and effectively, and then I suppose give the right support from the right expertise at the right time. So I think that's something we can come back to, both from an early support point of view and wider. You're right, we need to get the intelligence flowing appropriately with the right consent, and so that we can actually get some support to a child or a family. Take on board what you say, Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, it was just one element of it that kind of jumped out, but I think we lost something quite good with the NMGs going. I don't know if I assume they've gone everywhere. Certainly in my area we had a really good relationship with police, fire, community safety, wardens, everybody else. It all came together, so I just wonder where we were going. I've not seen what's replacing that. But on the whole, I think this is great. I think it's very positive, and it's going to, the budget's a little bit of a concern sometimes, but it'd be very interesting to see where this goes, because I think it's on a good track.
Councillor Kendrick.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I understand exactly where Councillor Holmes is coming from about NMGs, but the emphasis there was very much on these are the baddies who are causing disruption in our neighbourhood, not what do we do about these young people to make them change the behaviour. And this is a stance to do that. The one thing I don't think, and I may have misread it or missed it, isn't emphasised in this part of the report, is that MST provides a 24/7 service, in that there is always someone on duty. They work with a family about how to help, with a plan about how they help modify that behaviour, change it, and they're on call to the parents day and night, which I find astounding, and it is, which is why it's so intensive and not a huge number of cases at the moment. I mean, hopefully if better days ever come along to councils, I'd love to see us investing much more in this, because I think it's absolutely essential. But it is early days for this team. I would recommend that perhaps some data and stats comes back to scrutiny panel when they've had time to develop practice further. But I would say there are some fantastic case histories and outcomes from the family group conferencing that you might want to look at in the near future. I was absolutely blown away by what they're achieving. So I see it as a hopeful start.
If you're blowing Councillor Kendrick away, you must be doing something right. That's all I can say. That's fabulous.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it is really positive, a lot of what we see in here and how when you come and describe the work that is taking place with the different services working together, which we long hear about, but often don't actually see or hear the positive impacts and the outcomes that are achieved. So, as described, Councillor Kendrick, this information going forward I think would be very useful and important for Scrutiny to be involved with and to get updates on. Thank you. Okay, so we move on to item 8, which is the review of the 2018-19 work programme and consider items for 19-20. I will be meeting with the Director for Children's Services, and the Cabinet members' meetings have been lined up for us to discuss the work programme for the new municipal year. You will see on the papers that there are a number of items that are ongoing and will continue on till next year. We've also got papers for the informal meeting, which was due to take place at the end of this meeting, but unfortunately the papers didn't go out as they should have, so that will continue on to the next meeting of this panel. That's the Children's Performance Report and the Improvement Board minutes. Potential items to be considered to be arranged going forward are the sickness absent data of agency staff and children's services, CAMS info on what available digitally in support whilst waiting for assessment, a number of visits, one to Copland Children's Home and also to the duty and advice team. Also had another item raised today about exclusions and isolations. So this panel will consider all of the work programme for the new year. If there's anything that you think you want to highlight, you can do so now.
Particularly in light of our involvement with SEND, I think we should have a report from the local offer of Kirklees. I've looked at the website, which offers a simple guide for parents. Now, after 35 minutes, I gave up. It is simple to read, but it contains a lot of what and not a lot of how. There are numerous subheadings to click on, and I was trying to put myself in the position of a parent who suddenly realises, that they're having a difficulty, but how would they know about the offer? How do parents of Central know that there's such a thing as the local offer? I think it's something that we need to... I know it only began this year, so we need to be kept up to date as to how has it been accessed, has it been accessed, and what has been the result of that access. So, to me, the local offer is something that must be on the next year's agenda.
I would absolutely agree with you, and I would love Scrutiny to look at this. In the recent peer review we had, and we knew anyway, the whole thing about the local offer and how accessible and how it informs and how people connect to it was seen as something that we really needed to work on. And the service will work on it, but I'd like Scrutiny to be looking at it saying, what about that bit? You haven't got that bit right. What about? And so on. Because I think that actually will make a huge improvement, because it is really difficult actually to how you put the information out in an accessible form, but how people even can easily find it. And that is an anxiety for me. So I would really welcome Scrutiny's involvement with that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kendrick and Dale. I agree. I wonder whether there's some opportunities as well to look at some other aspects to continue the work that Scrutiny has done in this municipal year about children with special educational needs and disabilities, so that there is that continual eye on seeing improvements, because there's obviously an awful lot of work to be done. That is a very good one. I think we could come with some others, please, through your involvement. We'd welcome that.
Because of the recommendations that we made on SEND, I think we also need to go back to Pecan in Huddersfield and Dewsbury and see what has been the effect on those two groups of parents since have the recommendations actually been put into enforce? Are they enforced? Are they enforced yet? Are they working? Do the parents know about them? Do the parents think they're working? So we need to follow up that work that we did on the recommendations.
Yeah, thank you for the work will be followed up. I think as part of the recommendations that we've made, that we'll follow up and ensure that action is taking place, and that will be reported back to a meeting in the future.
One comment. I was delighted to see on this work programme the number of visits that we've been allocated. I think that's a very positive move. It might be controversial, but I think that before we receive any large or report on any particular sector, we need to visit both. We need to have access to both the providers and the users of that particular service. I remember this being particularly effective when I was a member of the ad hoc children's scrutiny panel, which reported at the same time as Ofsted did. And we did have access to both those providing the service and those using the service. And I think that we should, if it's possible, we should try and include access to both providers and users of services.
Thank you. I think I agree with what you have to say. I think we have done a lot more this year than we have done in previous years. We have worked a lot better in that regard. I think where it's possible and where time permits, I think it's useful to do, and it works well for us to get a greater understanding. Councillor Donovan.
Can I just throw a couple into the mix then for consideration? So we're going to bring back the item we've just discussed out at some later date around, family support and the therapies involved. I know I spoke to Jan before. We've worked on the summer-born. We looked at a family who were going through the summer-born policy, so I'd like to maybe look at that, make sure that that still works, and maybe allow panel members to get an understanding of that. And then school place pressures. I just wonder whether we could look at that. We've got family friends who've got children on waiting lists at BBG, Wycliffe and other places, and I have no historical knowledge of this, but the waiting list seems huge as an example for those two schools. And I just wondered what the pressures are. Maybe something to discuss in the year. Pressures are particularly around high school waiting lists and school place pressures, maybe.
I have a bit of a history with BBG, as you might recall. BBG 1, part of that is from the years when they were building up the school. So they've got out-of-area children, and the sibling rule is above what you would normally expect, and it's a zoned catchment. So it's 10% East Barley, 30% Birkenshaw, Birstall and Gummersall. We set that up years ago, and I'm surprised they're still running that, but obviously it's an academy, so they can define their own. But I think there is an element of BBG will feed out, because there's quite a few children, I believe, from places like Driglington, and they're not even Kirklees children. So the over-subscription, actually everybody in Birkenshaw and East Barley got in who was in catchment. There were just a few in Gummersall and Birstall who didn't. That bit, and I know Wycliffe has got a waiting list because I've had quite a lot of residents contacting me. But yeah, school places in general, I've spoken with Joanne extensively and probably driving her insane now. I think we do have. I've been speaking to Martin as well. Another thing I've looked at about school places, part of the problem is parents don't understand the implications of what they put on their application. So I think before that that comes to scrutiny, I think we look at the nuts and bolts of school places rather than going straight into the actual numbers, because a lot of the problems caused for parents are parents have not understood what they're putting down.
I think that's a helpful suggestion. Welcome scrutiny about sufficiency. So sufficiency for primary, secondary and specialist places. There's an exceptional document that we produce on an annual basis, but Councillor Holmes is spot on. It's not just about sufficiency, it's about then the operation of that sufficiency. So I think that would be very useful to go on to work programme for next year.
Okay, so as I said, there are some items which are outstanding which will be rolled over into the next year. The panel, when formed, and the chair of that committee will meet with the Director for Children's Services and the Cabinet members and then prioritise a list for panel to agree on in the new municipal year. Okay. I think there are no further items or comments or issues. Now I'd just like to thank all panel members for your attendance, your contribution throughout the year. Also for officers for attending and providing the information and in-depth analysis of the different issues that have been brought to us in the different areas that we've covered. I think we've worked really well this year, and also to the Cabinet members, especially Councillor Kendrick, for bringing it all together really and making sure that we work more effectively together, and scrutiny does add value to the processes that take place. So thank you.